The alien empress condemned his entire species to die. He spent the night changing her mind. The High Arbiter had been speaking for 4 minutes when I decided I had heard enough. He was building the case with the practiced fluency of someone who had rehearsed it many times before bringing it here, in smaller rooms, before smaller audiences, until the argument had worn smooth from repetition. His voice moved through the Yarketh throne hall in the low, resonant wave pattern of formal speech, and my translator implant rendered about 85% of it with functional accuracy, enough to follow the structure, enough to understand what the argument was building toward. It was building toward humanity should be removed as a precautionary measure before it had the opportunity to become an unmanageable problem. I was standing in chains at the center of the floor. The stone under my boots was gray-black and polished to the particular shine of surfaces that have been walked on by important people for a very long time. Above me, the ceiling of the Yarketh throne hall rose 40 feet and kept rising into architecture that had never been designed with human scale in mind. Around the circular gallery, 200 Yarketh court members watched me with the level, continuous attention of a species that has near-total peripheral vision and no apparent need to look away. They had 4 eyes each, 2 forward-facing, 2 smaller secondary ones at the temples that moved independently and gave them a field of view that was essentially complete. No one in that gallery needed to turn their head to watch me. They were all watching me without appearing to make any effort at all. Humans had been in Yarketh space for 9 years, officially documented contact for 7. Diplomatic communications had moved at the careful, incremental pace that happens between 2 civilizations when both are capable of real damage and neither has yet determined whether the other is worth the risk. Then 3 weeks ago, a border patrol incident had gone wrong in the specific way that border incidents go wrong when everyone is nervous and someone acts before they have time to think. I had been captured in the aftermath, transported 37 hours across Yarketh space, presented here, today, to a court that would decide what to do about the species I belonged to. The High Arbiter was a figure named Maldron, tall even by Yarketh standards, copper-skinned, with the specific authority of a man who had been the dominant voice in rooms for so long that he had stopped experiencing this as a position and had started experiencing it as a law of nature. He had documents arranged on a formal stand. He had precedents from 3 previous encounters with what he called developing civilizations, which my translator rendered with the flavor of a phrase that begins with potential and ends with a judgment. He had the measured, confident rhythm of a speaker who had prepared entirely for agreement and not at all for interruption. I had been watching his hands while he spoke. People who are building an honest case have a particular physical relationship with their evidence. They gesture toward it. They reference it openly. They want you to look at the same thing they are looking at. People who are building a case around something they know to be inaccurate tend to draw attention toward themselves rather than their documents. Maldron's hands had been moving toward his own body for the last 90 seconds. I was also watching the Empress. She sat at the far end of the hall on a raised platform that was less a throne than a declaration of position, elevated above the floor of the proceedings, but part of them, not removed from them. Young for an empress by every measure I had been able to assess through 3 weeks of monitoring a frequency I was not supposed to have access to. First year of rule. She had taken a seat already surrounded by people who had been operating in this court for decades and had very settled expectations about how it should continue to be run. Her skin had the copper tone of the high court lineage, but with something underneath it that my human eyes processed as close to gold. Not a distinct color, but a quality, like light coming from beneath the surface rather than reflecting off it. 4 eyes, 2 conventional forward-facing ones, 2 smaller secondary temple eyes that moved independently, tracking the room in the continuous sweep of someone accustomed to holding a position in a space where not everyone is on her side. She was watching me while Maldron spoke, not the speaker, not his documents. Me. I filed that. The specimen before this court, Maldron said, and my translator gave specimen the particular texture of a word that has contempt constructed into it at the foundation. represents the furthest point of direct contact the human species has achieved with our civilization. It is uninformed of our protocols. It is ignorant of our legal traditions. It was captured during an act of military aggression that cost the lives of 4 members of our border patrol. 3, I said. The throne hall went still. Not quiet. Still, the particular quality of stillness that happens when 200 people simultaneously revise what category of event they are witnessing. Maldron stopped mid-sentence. He turned to look at me with the expression of a man whose furniture has just expressed a preference. "I beg your pardon," he said. 3, I said again. "Your patrol lost 3 officers, not 4. Crew member Pethal was evacuated to your forward medical station and survived. He gave a formal statement to the inquiry board 8 days after the incident. My translator implant has been receiving court communications on an unshielded frequency overlap since day 4 of my detention. The number 4 has appeared in every official proceeding leading to this session. It is the wrong number. I thought the court should know before it appears in the final record." The silence counted its own seconds. "The human is correct," said a voice from the gallery. "Second level, left side. A legal scholar I had not yet identified by name. Pethal survived. The official casualty record reflects 3 losses. Maldron recovered with the ease of long practice. A smooth, fractional adjustment, barely visible, the technique of a man who has been caught in public before and has a rehearsed procedure for it. The specific number does not materially affect the substance of Chinan. It materially affects the accuracy of this proceeding," the Empress said. The hall found a heavier kind of quiet. She had not moved from her position. Her voice was lower than I had expected from her height, and it had a different quality from Maldron's trained authority, more deliberate, as if she was still learning which words to choose and was choosing carefully while she learned. Not cautious, careful. There is a significant difference between the two. All 4 of her eyes were on me. "You have been detained in this facility for 22 days, she said, "under continuous monitoring, without access to official communications." The monitoring system in my holding cell had an unshielded frequency overlap with the court communication channel, I said. "I did not engineer it. I identified it on day 4 and paid attention to what came through." "And what did you learn?" I looked at Maldron for one moment, then back at her. "Enough," I said, "to make the next several hours worth your time, if you are willing to have the conversation." Maldron moved before she could respond. "Your Radiance, the prisoner's unauthorized access to court communications, is itself evidence of the category of behavior that, High Arbiter." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "This court has heard your assessment at length. It will hear what the human has to say." She stood, simply, the way a person stands when they have decided something and are moving. "The formal vote is scheduled for tomorrow's session. Until that time, the prisoner will be provided with access appropriate to making whatever case he intends to make." She moved toward the rear exit. At the doorway, she stopped without turning. "One night," she said, "to the room, to me, use it well." She left. I stood in the center of the throne hall in my chains and looked at 200 faces looking back at me, and I thought about Earth, and about my sister Claire who had no idea where I was, and about my former commanding officer Owen Price, who had once told me that the single most important tactical skill was the ability to understand a room faster than the room understood you. I thought about the expression that had crossed Maldron's face when I corrected the number, the fraction of a second between my interruption and his recovery. That was not the face of a man who had made an honest error. It was the face of a man who had been using the wrong number deliberately, had been caught in open court, and was now rapidly calculating exactly how much else I might know. I knew quite a lot more. They moved me to new quarters after the session. Better ones. Actual furniture, a window overlooking the outer section of the station, and a guard who introduced himself as Peth, stood 6.5 feet in the doorway, and had clearly made a firm personal commitment to professional silence as his dominant interpersonal approach. "Peth," I said. He looked at me. "Is the monitoring system in this room on the same frequency overlap as my previous cell?" A pause. I am not authorized to answer that. Is that a yes? The same pause, same length. I am not authorized to answer that. He said it identically both times. Same words, same tone, the specific quality of a repeated statement that is not a confirmation and is not a denial. Peth, I said, I think this is going to be a very productive night. He closed the door. I sat by the window and began mapping the outer section of the station the way 10 years of fieldwork had made mapping a default response to new spaces, docking structures, service arms, maintenance lighting on the outer hull, 47 visible lit panels, 3 of them cycling on an irregular interval, active maintenance schedule rather than navigation protocol, which meant a crew rotation was running in that section tonight. People moving through predictable positions at predictable times, creating predictable gaps. The court channel was active. I put my back to the wall in the position that gave me both the window and the door in my sight line at once, and I started listening, and I did not waste a single minute of the night I had been given. The first hour of monitoring was administrative, scheduling correspondence, documentation routing, 2 officials whose identities my implant was building profiles on from speech patterns and reference titles, nothing that changed the shape of things. In the second hour, on a frequency adjacent to the court's main channel, I heard Maldron's name used in a private exchange, partially encrypted. The unencrypted frame around it contained 2 specific items, a location inside the station and a time. 2 hours before the morning session. I noted both. I thought about what a high arbiter who had used a deliberately incorrect casualty number would need to discuss privately, 2 hours before the vote that would determine the future of an entire species. Nothing about that calculation produced a comfortable result. I kept listening. I kept building. 3 things happened during the night, and none of them were accidents. The first came in the 3rd hour. Under the standard maintenance rotation, the one I had mapped from the lighting patterns outside the window, with its predictable personnel gaps at predictable intervals, a crew member separated from the group and moved toward my section of the facility rather than toward the service panel in the far corridor where the rest of the team was working. Peth was at my door. I heard the exchange through the wall. Authorization codes presented, checked against a list, the door mechanism cycling. The crew member came through the door, carrying a service kit, and the expression of someone doing routine work they had done many times before. He made it 2 steps into the room. I had positioned myself behind the door from the moment I identified the footsteps separating from the group. The confrontation that followed was fast and quiet. I had his service kit, his authorization card, and 3 items from inside the kit that had no function in standard maintenance work before Peth appeared in the doorway. I held the items out. "Take these somewhere," I said. "Not Maldron's office." Peth looked at the items in his hands. He looked at the individual I had secured against the far wall. He looked at me. He took the items. He had the individual removed from my room in under 5 minutes, which was efficient enough to tell me he had not needed to spend time deciding what to do. He had already been thinking about what to do. When he returned and stood in the doorway, his professional silence had a slightly different quality, not warm, changed, the specific kind of change that happens when someone's assessment of a situation shifts significantly and they are processing the shift. "You did not try the window," he said. "The window does not open," I said. "No," he said. "It does not." He closed the door. He moved his position closer to it after that, which told me he had made a decision about what his post actually required tonight. The second incident came at the 4th hour through the air handling system. Not a person. Something technical and slow-acting, designed to be readable afterward as a mechanical failure rather than a deliberate choice. I identified it because my field medical training had flagged a trace quality in the room's atmosphere as inconsistent with the baseline I had been recording since I arrived in these quarters. And because the maintenance lighting outside had shifted to the irregular cycle that meant active crew rotation, and because in the 2nd hour of channel monitoring I had heard a private exchange, a different voice from the first, a different channel, a different set of authorization codes, that had used the phrase adjusted atmospheric parameters. I had been monitoring two separate operations running in parallel during the same night. I blocked the vent with the room's secondary blanket, not a permanent solution, not designed to be, knocked on the door, and told Peth the atmospheric system in the room had been modified and he should have it checked. He checked it. He was gone longer than before. When he came back, the change in his professional silence was more significant this time. "Someone accessed the system 40 minutes ago," he said, "using credentials that should not have had authorization for this section of the facility." "The same authorization level that cleared the first crew member?" I said. He held my gaze steadily for a moment. "The authorization codes for internal system access in this section," he said, "fall under the administrative portfolio of the senior court advisor." "Torvin," I said. Peth was quiet for a longer moment than any previous pause. "I told you nothing," he said. "You arrived at that name through your own process." "Completely," I said. He closed the door. He stayed directly outside it from that point until morning, and I noted this, not as a tactical detail, but as a fact about a person who had made a decision that went beyond his assigned function and had made it without being asked. The third thing happened at the 6th hour, and it was the one I had not anticipated. The door opened without a knock. Not Peth. His movement profile outside the door was distinguishable by that point, and this was not it. Taller, narrower, moving with the precise efficiency of someone whose entire professional life has been organized around one specific function and who has fully mastered it. She stopped at the center of the room. All four eyes swept the space, the secondary temple eyes moving independently from the forward ones, the continuous scan of someone who assesses every room before she does anything else. "First Blade Rin," she said. The title before the name, formal Yarketh custom. "I serve Her Radiance's household directly." "Nathan Graves," I said. "I currently serve approximately no one, which is part of the larger problem both of us are here about." Her expression did not move. "You are uninjured." "Still, yes," I said, despite genuine effort on someone's part. "2 attempts," she said, "in 6 hours." "You knew about the first one before it happened," I said. "The second happened anyway." She was quiet in the way of someone weighing a level of honesty. Advisor Torvin's authorization level made it difficult to intercept the second attempt without revealing our awareness of his involvement before we were prepared to act on it, she said. "You have been watching him," I said, "and needed him not to know that." "That is accurate," she said. "How long?" I said. "Long enough to know the pattern," she said. "Not long enough to have what was needed to move against it." I looked at her. "The other human prisoner," I said. "Glenn Marsh. He was here 3 months before me. What happened to him?" Rin's expression shifted. A controlled, fractional thing, the Yarketh equivalent of something tightening in the face. "He died," she said. "The official record categorizes it as a health complication arising from the atmospheric differential between human biological requirements and the station's standard settings, and the investigation into the circumstances of his death," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Has not been formally closed," she said. I thought about Glenn Marsh, former Marine, reconnaissance specialty, methodical and patient, and very good at going into difficult situations and coming out of them. I had known him by professional reputation only, the kind you build in a community of people who do work that does not appear in official records. The agency had sent him as an initial contact attempt, 18 months ago. He had said yes to the assignment because someone had to go first, and he had understood what that meant. The atmospheric adjustment that had been applied to my room in the 4th hour was the same category of action as whatever the unclosed investigation into Glenn Marsh was still quietly examining. Marsh had not had a blocked vent and a field medical background and a guard who had updated his assessment on his own initiative. "Her Radiance wants to know whether you are still capable of making your case in the morning session," Rin said. "Yes," I said. "The 2 incidents tonight have not changed. They changed my information," I said. "Not my capability. What I have to present in the morning is better than it was before the night started. She looked at me with all four eyes and the expression of someone who had arrived in a room with a specific assessment and was finding it inadequate. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What were you expecting?" I said. She considered the question. "Someone more visibly frightened," she said, "or someone performing the absence of fear. The performance has a characteristic quality. You do not have it." I thought about Glenn Marsh going into a detention room on a station 37 hours from Earth, with no channel access and no field atmospheric training, and no one on the outside who was actively aware of what Torvin was willing to do. I thought about what it had cost him to say yes to the assignment, and what it had cost him to be wrong about how it would end. "I am frightened," I said. "I do not stop working when I am frightened. It is a habit I built for exactly this kind of situation." She held my gaze for a moment longer than the conversation required. "Her radiance will see you before the session," she said. "Peth will bring you, before the third standard hour." "I will be ready," I said. "One more thing." She was at the door. "The meeting location and time that Maldron arranged in the private channel. You have them." "Yes," I said. "Do not attempt to act on them independently," she said. "That situation is being handled through a separate process." "By your team," I said. "By the appropriate function," she said. "Your function is the morning session. Stay in it." "Understood," I said. She left. I sat with the window and the 47 lights in their maintenance cycle, and the court channel that had gone quiet, and I sat with the name Torvin, which I now had from two independent directions that had arrived at the same place without communicating with each other, and I sat with what I now knew about Glenn Marsh. I thought about him specifically for a while, because he deserved that. He had been the stronger candidate for the initial contact mission by almost every professional metric the agency used: better language acquisition scores, more cultural training hours, 3 additional years of field experience in environments with no established human presence. He had accepted the assignment in writing with the words, "Someone has to go first, in order for the situation to be understood. I would rather it be someone who knows what they are walking into." He had known. He had not known about Torvin. The difference between his outcome and mine was not capability or preparation or willingness to take risk. It was information and position. He had not had a frequency overlap on day 4. He had not had a guard who revised his assessment on the basis of what he personally observed rather than what his instructions said. He had not had someone appearing at his door in the 6th hour to tell him which situation was being handled and by whom. What he had had was every qualification the job required, and a set of operational conditions that had been modified against him without his knowledge, and no offsetting factors. I thought about the atmospheric adjustment in the 4th hour of this night, how slow it had been designed to be, how it had been calibrated to look like a mechanical failure, how long it would have taken to register as something other than an equipment malfunction, without the field medical background that had flagged the air quality change in the first 90 seconds. I stopped thinking about Glenn Marsh and started working, because that was the thing I could do for him at this point. I thought about what Rin had said, being handled. And I thought about what a woman in her first year of rule, surrounded by a court built decades before she arrived, might have been quietly building toward in the months since her ascension. What evidence she had been accumulating, what threshold she had been waiting to reach, what moment she had been waiting to have enough to move on. I went over my case, the honest version, not the diplomatic one, the version that was verifiable and direct, and that left a door open rather than closing one, the version that invited the court to arrive at its own conclusion from accurate information rather than accepting mine. I had been building it for 23 days. I knew every element of it completely. I did not sleep. I did not waste a second of the night she had given me. I built and I refined, and when the maintenance lights outside completed their rotation and the channel went fully quiet and the station moved into the last interval before the 3rd standard hour, I sat back and I was ready. Dawn on a Yarketh station has no sunrise. The lighting system shifted at the 3rd standard hour from a warmer overnight cycle to the full operational setting, a change from low warmth to clean white that was thorough, instantaneous, and entirely without the gradual quality that human biology is optimized to experience as a transition into waking. You were in one state, then you were in another. The station did not care about the difference. Peth knocked at 3 hours and 12 minutes. He was ahead of the standard shift change, which meant the instruction had reached him before his rotation started, which meant someone had arranged it the night before. "Her Radiance will see you," he said. "Not will see the prisoner, will see you." A specific word choice in the Yarketh formal register that carried weight, and that Peth used deliberately, which told me something clear about the direction of his current assessment. "Thank you, Peth," I said. He waited while I made myself as presentable as 23 days in the same clothes permitted, which was not very presentable, and then he brought me through a route that did not appear in any of the standard station documentation I had mapped from the channel communications. Less formal than the main corridors, fewer staff, fewer monitoring points, fewer of the official recording stations that logged movement through the facility. The kind of route that exists when someone needs to move a person from one location to another without the movement appearing in the official record. Rin was at the end of it, at a door I had not seen in any schematic. She looked at me. "How much of it did you build overnight?" she said. "All of it," I said. "I had the structure since day 4. Last night gave me the specifics." She opened the door. The room on the other side was not an audience chamber. It was smaller than any official space I had been brought to since arriving, without the gallery, without the formal platform, without the architecture designed to declare positions. 2 chairs, a window, the lower temperature lighting that the Yarketh used in private spaces rather than official ones. The kind of room where the structure of the conversation depends on the people in it, rather than the room around them. The Empress was standing at the window. Not seated in a formal arrangement, standing at the window the way a person stands when they have been awake for a while and need something to look at while they think. The view from this angle faced outward from the main structure, the deep dark between the docking arms, and in it, the star geometry of this region of space, arranged in no pattern I had grown up recognizing. She heard us come in. She turned. One chair was positioned across from her. The distance between her window and the chair was close enough for a direct conversation, far enough for it to remain appropriate. The choice of how much of that distance to close was mine. I closed most of it, left enough to be respectful. She looked at me with all 4 eyes. Up close, the gold quality in the copper of her skin was more pronounced than it had been across the length of the throne hall. Her secondary temple eyes tracked slightly differently from her primary ones, the forward eyes steady, the temple eyes making their continuous small adjustments, reading everything at once. "You did not sleep," she said. "No," I said. "But you are ready." "I have been ready for most of 3 weeks," I said. "Last night gave me the specific pieces I was still building around." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about your species," she said. Not a formal instruction. Direct. The tone of someone who has set aside the prepared version of a conversation and is asking for the real one. "Tell me why they deserve to continue existing." Not the argument you prepared for the court, not the diplomatic version. Tell me what you actually think. I had spent 23 days building the diplomatic version. I looked at her, and I put it aside. "Humanity is not easy to categorize," I said. "We have done significant damage, to each other, to the environment we live in, to people we were specifically responsible for protecting, and we continue to do it, and we argue about whether and how to stop, and the arguments are slow and often counterproductive, and we sometimes make things worse while arguing about them. We have started conflicts over things that are indefensible from any external perspective. We have made decisions we knew were wrong and made them anyway." I paused. "We have also made decisions we knew were costly in the other direction, and made them anyway. We have repaired things we broke. We have built things across generations that no single person lived long enough to see finished and died working on them regardless. We carry contradictory qualities simultaneously, and we do not always know which direction we are heading." She was very still. "That is not an argument," she said. "That is a description of a problem." "You asked what I thought," I said. "That is what I think. The argument is different." Then make the argument, she said. Every civilization in the Yarketh archives documented history, I said, and her expression shifted, fractionally, because she had not expected me to reference the archive directly, was assessed at its first contact point, categorized, manageable or unmanageable, developing or terminal, asset or liability. The ones categorized as terminal did not have the opportunity to become anything other than what they were at the moment of that judgment." End quote. I looked at her. I am not asking this court to conclude that humanity is good. I am asking it to conclude that the question is still open, that what we are today, in this room, at this specific moment, is not the complete and final answer to what we might be in 50 years. She was quiet for a long moment. The High Arbiter would say, she said, that what you might become in 50 years is the precise reason to act now, while the cost is manageable. The High Arbiter has been saying that, I said, in various forms, for the past 3 months, since before I arrived, since before the border incident. I paused. Since before Glenn Marsh died. Her expression changed, a small thing, controlled but real. You know about Marsh, she said. I know about the atmospheric adjustment made to his room during his detention, I said, and the adjustment made to mine last night, and the authorization codes that connect both to the same administrative portfolio. I held her gaze. Torvin, senior advisor to the court. He has been managing the information that reaches this proceeding. He modified the official casualty documentation before Maldron's session. He arranged what happened to Glenn Marsh to prevent a human from making the same case I am here to make. And he arranged 2 attempts on my life last night using internal access codes that only his portfolio controls. She held very still. You arrived at that name, she said. From 3 independent directions, I said. The access logs from last night's 2 incidents, both routing to the same portfolio. Confirmation from Peth, who traced the atmospheric access credentials. Confirmation from Rin, who told me the situation was being handled separately, which means your team has been building evidence on Torvin from a direction that predates my arrival. She was quiet for a long time. Why, she said, the honest question, not the formal one. What does Torvin gain from preventing your case? He does not gain from preventing my case, I said. He gains from preventing your decision. She looked at me. If you make an independent decision, I said, one that goes against the High Arbiter's recommendation, based on direct testimony you personally obtained, you establish that you act on independent evidence, that you do not simply ratify what the existing power structure presents to you, that you evaluate and decide. I paused. This is not about humanity. This is about who controls the direction of this court for the next 50 years. The room was very quiet. The station's systems made their low, periodic sound in the walls. The distance between the stars outside the window was unimaginable in any human unit of measurement. You have been building that framework for 23 days, she said. The framework since day 4, I said. Last night gave me the evidence. She turned to the window. The distant stars, the dark between the docking arms. When I took this seat, she said, I was 2 years past my formal study and 4 years past my field certification, and I was placed at the center of a court that had been operating the same way for 40 years under 4 different emperors and empresses. She paused. Maldron has served all 4 of them. He knows this institution better than anyone alive. He is also deeply invested in it remaining exactly what it is. I know, I said. Torvin has been his instrument for 12 years, she said. I have suspected this. I have not had enough to act on. You have more now, I said. The documentation chain from an unshielded frequency overlap in a detention cell, she said, will not meet the formal legal threshold for action against a senior advisor on its own. No, I said, but it supplements what your team has been building from a separate direction. Ryan told me the situation was being handled, which means the threshold question is about timing, not quantity. She looked at me. You are very thorough, she said. I had 23 days, I said, and a very useful night. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from the session this morning?" she said. "What specific outcome are you working toward?" "I want the vote deferred," I said. "Not reversed. Not decided in humanity's favor by default. Deferred, on the grounds that the information presented to this court has been selectively managed and the record needs to be corrected before a final decision is made. A deferral is not a victory for your species," she said. "A deferral is time," I said. "Time is the only thing I cannot build a case without." She studied me. "Maldron has a constructed coalition," she said. "Even if the record is successfully challenged today, he has the votes to push the measure through. He has been building that coalition for months." "I know," I said. "And you still believe the session can change the outcome?" I thought about what I actually believed, the real version, not the strategic one. "I believe," I said, "that you are an empress in your first year of rule, surrounded by a court full of people who arrived before you and have been expecting you to ratify rather than decide. I believe you are not interested in ratifying." I held her gaze. "I believe this session matters to you for reasons that extend far beyond humanity's situation, and that those reasons and mine are currently pointing in the same direction. That makes each of us more useful to the other than either of us is alone." She was very still. "You are either," she said, "the most honest person who has ever been brought before this court, or the most carefully prepared. Those two things," I said, "are not mutually exclusive." She held my gaze for a moment longer. Something moved in her expression that I did not yet know her well enough to fully name. Then she sat down. Not in the formal arrangement she had been maintaining. She sat in the chair across from the one I had been standing near, the way a person sits when they have decided to change the register of a conversation and are indicating this by changing their posture in it. "Tell me about the meeting," she said. "The location and time in Maldron's private channel. What did you conclude from it?" "That he has a secondary operation running parallel to the formal proceeding," I said. "Something that does not go through the official record. The meeting is scheduled 2 hours before the session, which means it is either final alignment with whoever is coordinating the administrative side of what Torvin does, or it is contingency planning for an outcome Maldron considers possible, that the documentation chain is exposed and the coalition does not hold." "Contingency planning," she said. "For what contingency specifically?" "For a vote that does not go the way he expects," I said, "which means he is not entirely certain his coalition will hold if the record is accurately challenged." She was quiet. "That is significant," she said. "A coalition built on managed information is only as strong as the management," I said. "Remove the management and you do not know what holds." She nodded slowly. "He has been preparing this case for 3 months," she said. "I have been watching it develop. The coalition contacts, the briefings to specific gallery members, the documentation preparation. It has been thorough." "It has been thorough about the wrong thing," I said. "He prepared to win a proceeding against a human prisoner with no access to accurate information and no channel into the court's communications. He did not prepare for the version of this that actually happened." She held that for a moment. "Neither did I," she said, "entirely." I looked at her. "You prepared for Torvin to be exposed," I said. "You have been building toward that. Rin told me the situation was being handled. That is not a spontaneous response to last night. That is a prepared response deployed at the right moment." "Yes," she said, "but I did not prepare for the specific shape of the case you are going to make this morning. The documentation chain. The 3 independent verification sources." She paused. "I prepared for a human prisoner who would make an emotional appeal, an argument from desperation or from cultural pride, something I could support in principle but could not use as the basis for a formal court action. And instead," I said. "And instead," she said, "you spent 23 days building exactly the kind of case that is very difficult for a formal court to ignore, and you did it from inside a detention cell using a monitoring overlap, and last night you survived 2 attempts on your life and spent the remaining hours finishing the case rather than recovering from the attempts." She looked at me. "This is not what I was prepared for. I am sorry if that creates complications." I said. She looked at me for a moment. It does not create complications, she said. It creates a different kind of morning than I was expecting. She paused. A better one. She held my gaze for a moment longer. Something moved in her expression that I did not yet know her well enough to fully name. The session begins in 2 hours, she said. Ryan will bring you back. I nodded and started to turn. Mr. Graves, she said. I turned back. Whatever the outcome this morning, she said, the question is not closed. I want you to know that I mean it. I looked at her. Then use the time, I said. She almost smiled. Brief, small, real. Rin brought me back. I spent the remaining 2 hours putting the case into its cleanest form, not the full version, the version that a court of 200 could follow without interpretation, the version that was true and verifiable and that left a door open rather than forcing one closed, the version that gave the court the documented path and let it arrive at its own conclusions. I had been building it for 23 days. I knew every element of it completely. I was ready. The formal session began at the 3rd standard hour, exactly as scheduled. I was brought in through the same main entrance as the previous session and positioned at the center of the floor. Unchained this time. Someone had made that decision, and I noted it as a deliberate signal. The absence of the chains changed what the court was looking at, and whoever had decided it knew that. 200 court members in the gallery. Maldron at his document stand, composed and present, with nothing on his face to suggest that last night had produced any complications for him. Velsha, the legal scholar who had corrected the casualty number, was positioned in the 2nd gallery row with a stack of documentation that had not been there yesterday. Torvin, senior advisor to the court, occupied his administrative position in the upper gallery, copper-skinned, unremarkable, watching the proceedings with the calm attention of a man who expected to know how they ended before they did. The Empress was seated on her platform. She looked at me when I was positioned, a brief look, the particular quality of a person who has made a decision and is not going to revisit it. Velsha, not Maldron, opened the session with the formal recitation of the vote terms, a procedural deviation. I watched Maldron register it. He filed it without expression, but his hands moved fractionally toward his own body. Velsha noted, as part of the recitation, that the official casualty count in the session documentation had been amended following the previous session's correction. 3 losses, not 4. The record reflects this. The human prisoner will now present his response to the court, the Empress said. I spoke for 20 minutes. I did not ask for mercy. I did not build an emotional case. I presented the documented history of human activity in the 9 years since we had entered Yarketh space. The parts correctly recorded in the official intelligence summary provided to Maldron's committee, and the parts that had been omitted or modified laid side by side so the court could see the differential directly. I included 2 specific examples from the documented human record that the official summary had omitted entirely. The first was an incident 3 years into our presence in this region of space, in which a human vessel had intercepted a distress signal from a Yarketh courier ship experiencing mechanical failure at a distance from any Yarketh station. The human crew had provided emergency assistance and departed without attempting to access the courier's communications or cargo. The incident appeared nowhere in the official summary. I had found it in the archive on day 11. The second was a series of diplomatic communications in which human representatives had voluntarily disclosed information about human military capabilities that the Yarketh had not asked for and had not known to ask for, on the stated grounds that accurate information about a potential partner was more valuable than maintaining an information advantage. This had also not appeared in the official summary. I was not presenting these as evidence that humans were good. I was presenting them as evidence that the picture was incomplete. I had identified 3 specific data points in the official summary that were factually inconsistent with the archive I had absorbed during 23 days of monitoring. I walked the court through each one methodically. For each inconsistency, I identified the document control chain, every stage from original source to official summary, every point where the modification had been introduced, every authorization code attached to that modification. Each chain converged at the same administrative portfolio. I did not say the name. I gave the court the documented path and let it arrive at the name on its own, because that is the only way an institution will follow an argument to a conclusion it did not enter the room expecting to reach. A name presented without documented support is dismissed. A name that a court arrives at from a verified documentation chain is a different matter entirely. I watched the gallery as the convergence became clear. 200 people, all with their near-total peripheral vision, all processing the documentation chain simultaneously. The quality of collective attention in the room shifted in the specific way it shifts when a large group of people updates an understanding they had believed was settled. Heads that had been angled toward the document stand began to orient differently. Secondary temple eyes that had been tracking the floor began to track the upper gallery. They were looking at Torvin. Not all at once. Gradually, the way attention moves in a room when it is following a logical conclusion to a location, rather than being directed there by someone in authority. Maldrin, to my left, was watching me with the composed expression of someone who had decided which option to exercise and was timing the exercise. I finished with this. I am not asking this court to determine that humanity is not a risk. I am asking it to determine the question from accurate information rather than managed information. A decision made on a manipulated record is not a decision. It is a conclusion that was placed in front of you before you walked through the door. He stepped forward from his position, unhurried, the practiced movement of a man who has been operating inside institutions for so long that he understands their rhythms the way a person understands their own house. He addressed the court in the formal register of a senior official raising a procedural challenge. The documentation chain the prisoner presents, he said, cannot be verified through standard court archive access, because the underlying information was obtained through unauthorized monitoring of a restricted frequency. The prisoner accessed communications he was not entitled to receive. The court cannot act on information obtained through illegal means, regardless of what that information appears to show. He was technically right. It was a clean challenge. It was also exactly the challenge I had spent 2 hours the night before preparing for. The documentation chain I presented, I said, can be verified through 3 independent sources, none of which involve the monitoring channel. The first is the official casualty record, already corrected on the floor of this court yesterday. The second is the archive access log for each document I referenced, which records every modification made, under which authorization code, at which time. The third is the formal testimony of crew member Pethal, who survived the border incident and whose statement has been available to this court for 20 days and has not been included in any session materials. I looked at Velsha. She produced a document from her stack. Pethal's formal statement was submitted to this court's records office 20 days ago, she said. It has not been included in any session material. The routing record indicates it was held pending administrative review, under whose authorization, the Empress said. The routing record was entered into the formal record and read aloud to the court. It was Torvin's authorization code. The gallery shifted. Not loudly. Yarketh formal proceedings do not shift loudly, but the quality of attention in the room changed in the way a room changes when 200 people simultaneously update an understanding they believed was settled. I watched Torvin. His composure did not break. That was the significant detail. The composure of a man who is not surprised because he has a second option, and who is now determining when to use it. He began to move. Not immediately, not obviously. A gradual repositioning from his administrative station in the upper gallery, the kind of movement that could be attributed to shifting posture rather than directed intention. Down one gallery level, using the side access that required no formal announcement. Then another level. The gallery's attention was on the documentation exchange at the center floor. His movement was outside the primary focus. I was watching him the entire time. When he reached the lower gallery, his secondary temple eyes completed their last survey of the room and settled, fixed. When the Yarketh temple eyes stop moving, the person has stopped assessing and has committed to a specific target. His temple eyes were fixed on the platform. I was already moving before the thought had fully formed into language. 20 feet is the distance. The time it takes is the time it takes when you are moving, without announcement and without hesitation. Faster than it looks. Faster than people in formal court gallery seating are prepared to anticipate from a position on the floor. I reached the platform stairs 2 steps ahead of him. He had something in his right hand. My training categorized and responded to it in the same motion. Identification and response are one action, not 2 sequential ones when the training is complete. The object did not reach the Empress. It reached the floor. Rhine arrived from the other side of the platform 3 seconds behind me. She handled the rest. I stepped back, put one hand on the platform rail. The ribs on my left side had a message for me that I was not ready to receive publicly. The throne hall was absolutely completely still. Every person in the gallery was looking at the floor, at Torvin now restrained by Rin and 2 additional guards who had materialized from positions I had not mapped, at the object on the ground. The Empress was on her feet. She looked at Torvin, at the guards, at the object, at Rin, who gave her a brief nod that meant, "This is managed. All of this is managed." Then she looked at me. Her expression had the quality of something very large being held with deliberate, total care. The contained composure of a person managing a response larger than the current moment can fully accommodate. I looked back at her. "I had a reason to cover that distance," I said, quietly. "Not for the court, for her. That had nothing to do with the case." Her expression moved, a small thing, not visible from the gallery, visible to me because I was close enough and had been paying enough attention. "Sit down," she said, "before you fall down." "I am fine," I said. "You are not fine," she said. "Sit down." I sat down. The ribs registered their formal complaint, and I acknowledged it, and told it we would negotiate later. The hall, very slowly, came back to its own kind of life. I came back to myself in sections. The ribs reported first. Cracked on the left side. Rin's field medic confirmed this with the efficient brevity of someone communicating necessary information and nothing beyond it. The right hand had a shallow cut from something I could not specifically recall acquiring during the confrontation, which was below the threshold of significance. Rin was at the far wall speaking to someone on a communication terminal. Peth was at the door. "Peth," I said. He turned. His expression, for the first time in the 23 hours I had known him, had something in it that was not professional neutral. I could not categorize it precisely across the species gap. It was in the general vicinity of relief. "You are awake," he said. "Yes," I said. "How long?" 2 standard hours, he said. "The session, suspended," he said. "Pending the formal inquiry." "And the vote?" He was quiet for a moment. "Her Radiance has ordered the vote to proceed immediately following the inquiry. She has said that a decision held in suspension indefinitely is not a decision." "And Maldron?" I said. He chose his words carefully. "The High Arbiter has not been formally charged with anything at this time," he said. "His relationship with Torvin's operations is being assessed. He is present in the facility, but not in an official capacity, pending the assessment outcome." "He did not know the full extent of what Torvin was doing," I said. Peth looked at me. "That is possible," he said. "It is the most likely scenario," I said. "Maldron wanted a specific outcome from this proceeding. Torvin provided the operational support for that outcome using methods that Maldron may have chosen not to examine closely. That is not the same as directing those methods." "That distinction," Peth said, "will matter to the formal assessment." "Yes," I said. "It will." I thought about Maldron's expression during the session, the composed, calculating attention of someone watching a situation develop and deciding in real time how to respond to it. He had not looked like a man watching his own plan collapse. He had looked like a man watching a situation he had not fully controlled produce an outcome he had not fully controlled. That was a different thing. I thought about that. "She is right about that," I said. Rin finished her communication and came across the room. She looked at me with the four-eyed assessment that by now I had become reasonably accustomed to. "The court reconvenes in 3 hours," she said. "Formal inquiry testimony first. The vote immediately following." 3 hours, I said. "You will be asked to give formal testimony," she said. "The documentation chain, the 2 incidents last night, the sequence at the platform stairs." "Yes," I said. "The court will ask about the 20 feet," she said. "You were at floor level, not in a position to intercept. You moved before the guards did, before anyone in the gallery had identified what was happening." "I was watching him," I said. "From the moment he began to reposition," she said. "What made you certain enough to move before anyone else did?" "His temple eyes," I said. "They stopped moving. When the Yarketh secondary eyes stop tracking the room and fix on a single point, the person has stopped assessing and has committed to a target. The decision is already made at that point." I paused. I have been working in proximity to Yarketh for a significant portion of my professional career. I have been reading eye movements in rooms for longer than that. Rin was quiet for a moment. 20 feet, she said. In that amount of time. "I am very good at covering distance when the situation requires it," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had a comment and had decided the current moment was not the right one for it. She went back to the communication terminal. Peth brought water. He did not explain whether this was standard medical procedure or a personal decision. "Thank you, Peth," I said. He nodded. His silence had a completely different texture from the professional neutral of the previous day. It was still silence. It was not the same silence at all. "After this is over," I said, "however it ends, what you did last night, the items from the first crew member, the atmospheric check, staying at the door all night when your shift ended 3 hours in. That was beyond what your posted assignment required." He was quiet for a long moment. "I was aware of what happened to the previous human prisoner," he said. "I filed a report through the standard chain when I noticed the conditions were similar. Nothing came of the report." He paused. "I used a different chain last night, one that does not route through the standard administrative structure." I looked at him. "That took something," I said. "It required understanding which chain was the correct one to use," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "That is something I should have understood 3 months ago. I did not tell him it was not his fault. It was not useful to tell people things they already know, when what they are actually processing is the cost of a decision they cannot unmake. I let it sit where it needed to sit. After the formal process starts, I said, if a diplomatic structure is established between our species, people who understood which chain to use and acted on it would be valuable in that structure." He was quiet for a longer time. "I will consider it," he said. The 3 hours passed, the way recovery time passes when the body is doing repair work and the mind is running its own parallel process. I went over the testimony structure, the documentation chain in its cleanest form, the 3 independent verification sources. The Pethal statement, which had been suppressed for 20 days and was now part of the official record, the sequence at the platform stairs, describable in specific and verifiable terms. I did not go over the 20 feet themselves, because they did not require preparation. They had happened the way things happen, when the body acts before deliberation has time to intervene. The deliberate moment had been earlier. The deliberate moment had been the decision made in a small room with a window and distant stars, before the session, that the case I was building was not the only reason I had come here to make it. I thought about what that meant, specifically, sitting in a waiting room outside a chamber where 200 members of an alien court were determining the future of everyone I had ever known. I had come here to make a case. I had made it. The case had been honest and documented and as complete as 23 days and 1 useful night could make it. Whether it was enough had never been fully within my control. The 20 feet had been separate from the case. They had not been calculation. They had been something the body does when it has already decided, before the mind has time to construct reasons. I had been deciding it, I thought, since the morning session in the small room. Since she had asked me what I actually thought, and I had told her, and she had asked me what my argument was and I had made it, and the whole conversation had been the honest version of something rather than the diplomatic version, and there is a specific thing that happens when two people are both being honest at the same time in a room together. It is not a comfortable thing. It is a true thing. I sat with it. Peth waited with me. Velsha conducted the inquiry. Documentary evidence entered into the record. Access logs, routing records, the Peth-Al statement, the modification timestamps for every altered document in the official summary. 2 additional witnesses testified regarding Torvin's administrative operations over the preceding 4 months. Maldrin, whose formal title remained unchanged but whose presence in the hall had the particular quality of something in the process of becoming less, sat at his document stand and said nothing for the first time in the proceeding. I gave my formal testimony last. I walked the court through the documentation chain from the beginning. I described the 2 incidents during the night. I explained the reasoning chain that had produced Torvin's name and the 2 independent sources that had confirmed it. I described the sequence at the platform stairs in specific and verifiable terms. The repositioning, the secondary eyes settling, the 20 feet, the object on the floor. When I finished, the Empress asked me one question. "Based on everything this court has heard today," she said, "and on the information you have presented, what is your formal recommendation regarding the question before it?" 200 faces in the gallery. Peth at the back, near the main entrance, positioned closer to the floor than his original assigned post. Rin at the platform, first position, watching the room with the total attention of someone whose entire function is exactly this. I thought about the diplomatic recommendation, the carefully calibrated one, the one that served the situation and protected the outcome. "I recommend," I said, "that this court form its own conclusion from accurate information, not mine, yours, formed without the interference of someone who decided the outcome before anyone in this room walked through the door." The hall was still. "That is not a recommendation," the Empress said. "It is the honest one," I said. "You have a court full of people who have been telling you what to decide. I am not going to be another one." A pause. "Then I will ask a different question," she said. "In your personal assessment, is your species worth the time it would require to find out what it might become?" I thought about Claire, who was a teacher and had taught the same classroom for 5 years and knew every one of her students by name and knew the names of their parents. I thought about Owen Price, who had spent 3 weeks pushing every diplomatic channel available to him in an attempt to get me back out of a situation he had known from the briefing was significantly higher risk than the official classification indicated. I thought about Glenn Marsh, who had come to this station alone, who had not been careful enough or lucky enough or positioned correctly, and who had said yes to the assignment anyway because someone had to go first, and he had understood what that meant. "Yes," I said, "we are worth the time." The vote was held. Rin brought me to the waiting room outside the chamber while the formal count ran, and I sat with my taped ribs and the cut on my right hand and the patient, complete stillness that a decade of fieldwork had built into me, and I waited. Peth waited with me. We did not speak for the first portion of the time. Then he said, "The count takes approximately 30 minutes for a full formal session." "I know," I said. He was quiet again. "Then the gallery was attentive during your testimony." "I noticed," I said. He processed something for a moment. "The 2 incidents last night," he said. "When you blocked the vent and knocked on the door, you were not afraid." "I was," I said. "I was afraid that the second attempt would work before I had the chance to find out what the morning session could produce. Fear about a specific outcome is manageable. It gives you something to work against." He was quiet for a long time. "The other human," he said, "Marsh." "Yes," I said. "He was also a capable person," he said, "from what I observed during his time here." "He was very capable," I said. "He did not have—" Peth stopped. "He did not have someone at his door who updated their assessment on their own initiative," I said. Peth was quiet for a long time after that. Rin appeared in the doorway. I stood. 47 in favor of the elimination measure, she said. 143 against. 10 abstentions. The measure is defeated. the court has voted to open formal diplomatic contact with the human delegation currently stationed at the border sector. 143. I did the math automatically, and the margin was not close, and what the margin meant was this. The coalition Maldron had spent months building had been built on managed information, and when the management was removed and the record was accurate, the coalition had not held. 200 people given correct information had arrived at a very different place than 200 people given managed information. That was, in some ways, the entire argument I had come here to make. The other thing the margin meant was that before today, before the documentation chain and the corrected record and the 2 attempts last night that had exposed the extent of what Torvin had been operating, the vote would have been much closer. Maldron's preparation had been thorough and patient and built over months. It had required thorough, patient, accurate opposition to fail. I thought about what it had taken to provide that, about a frequency overlap on day 4, about Peth outside a door, about Rin arriving in the 6th hour, about 23 days of building something from a detention cell that a court of 200 could follow to a conclusion, about 1 night. "Mr. Graves," Rin said. "1 minute," I said. She waited. She waited. I sat with the station hum and the small window in the waiting room wall and the distant star geometry visible from this angle, and I thought about 47 light years, and about 1 night, and about a vote that had produced a margin that should not have been as large as it was, and was that large because of a day, and a night, and 23 days before them. I thought about Glenn Marsh, who had come first, who had not had the offsetting factors, who had said yes to the assignment anyway, because someone had to go first, and he had understood what that meant, who had made the path slightly less impossible for whoever came after him, even though he had not survived it. I thought about a question that was still open. "All right," I said, "let's go." The Empress received me in the private room again, the one with the chairs and the window, and the distant stars that were not arranged in any pattern I had grown up recognizing as a sky. She was standing when I came in, the same position as before, and she turned when she heard the door. She looked at me, at the taped ribs, at the cut on my right hand, at the arrangement of someone who has been in a brief, necessary physical crisis and is now in the less dignified interval that follows. "Sit," she said. "I am—" "You said that the last time," she said. "Sit." I sat. She sat across from me. 143, she said. "Yes," I said. "Rhine told me." "The formal diplomatic process begins tomorrow," she said. "Delegations, established protocols, a procedural structure that will take months to properly implement." "I know," I said. "You will be part of it," she said. "In a formal capacity, the primary human contact point for the initial phase." I thought about what that meant in practical terms, about Owen Price receiving a communication in the next several hours that would require him to significantly revise his operational planning, about the agency, and the diplomats currently stationed at the border sector who had been waiting without information for 3 weeks, and what the next several months would require of all of them. "That was not what I came here expecting," I said. "No," she said, "it is what the situation produced." She looked at me for a moment. "In the session," she said, "when Torvin moved, you were at floor level, 20 feet. "Yes," I said. "You told me, when you reached the rail, that you had a reason to cover the distance that had nothing to do with the case," she said. "Yes," I said. "What did you mean?" she said. I thought about the diplomatic answer, the framing that placed the action entirely within the context of strategic value, that a living empress was more useful to humanity's situation than a dead one, that the session's outcome had depended on her presence, that there was a clear and calculable professional rationale for every foot of those 20 feet. All of that was true. None of it was what I had meant. I meant, I said, that the question being still open matters to me in a way that has nothing to do with the vote. And the person who told me this morning that the question was still open matters to me in a way I was not prepared for before this week, and am not going to pretend about now. The room was very quiet. She held my gaze with all four eyes. "You are very honest," she said, "for someone in your position." "I was told," I said, "that honesty was the only argument worth making. I am trying to be consistent." She was quiet for a moment. "The process is going to be slow," she said. "It is structured to be slow. There will be formal sessions and procedural steps, and it will move at the pace that these things are designed to move." "I know," I said. "You will be here for most of the initial phase," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at the window, the dark between the docking arms, the stars in their unfamiliar arrangements. "It is unusual," she said quietly, "to have the first direct human contact be this kind of conversation." "What kind?" I said. She thought about it for a moment. "An honest one," she said, "from both sides." I thought about 23 days and a frequency overlap, and one night of not sleeping, and Glenn Marsh, who had come before me and had not made it, and who had come anyway. I thought about what it had cost to go from day one in a detention cell to this room and this conversation. "Someone had to make it that kind," I said, "given what was at stake." She looked at me with all four eyes. "The process starts tomorrow," she said. "You should rest. Your ribs require it." "So should you," I said. "You have been holding this together since before the session opened this morning." She looked at me. "You are telling an empress to rest," she said. "I am observing," I said, "that you have been in this room in that position, managing several things simultaneously for a significant number of hours, and that one of the options available to you before tomorrow begins is to not be in a room managing something." She was quiet. "You are consistent," she said. "I try," I said. She held my gaze for a moment longer. "The question is still open," she said. "For the record, both of us know what I mean by that." I held that. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly what you mean." I left. Peth was in the corridor. He walked me back through the non-standard route, the one that did not appear in the official schedule, and he said nothing until we reached the door of my quarters. He opened the door. "Peth," I said. "Yes." "Make sure whoever handles the Marsh inquiry knows where to find me," I said. "His case should be closed correctly. With everything that came out today, there is enough to close it correctly." He nodded. "It will be," he said. He closed the door. I sat by the window. The 47 lights in the outer section, the same lights as last night, the same 3 on their irregular maintenance cycle. Everything in the same position doing the same things, the station continuing its operations without any particular acknowledgement that today had happened. 143 to 47. I thought about Claire, who was going to receive a communication in the next 12 hours that would require her to significantly update her understanding of where her brother was and how he was doing. I thought about Owen Price, who had been pushing every diplomatic channel available to him for 3 weeks, and was about to find out that the channels had produced something none of them had been expecting them to produce. I thought about a vote, about a margin established in a single session, about what that margin meant, that 200 people given accurate information had arrived at a very different answer than they would have reached if the information had stayed managed. I thought about a question that was still open. And I sat with the station hum and the distant stars in their unfamiliar arrangements, and the 47 lights counting their cycles, and for the first time in 23 days I let myself simply be where I was, without building anything or preparing anything or constructing the next argument. Just sitting. Outside, in the dark between the docking arms, the stars were exactly where they had always been, arranged in patterns that no human had grown up learning. They did not move on any scale that a human life can observe. But the things between them do, slowly, over distances too large for speed to feel meaningful, in directions that only become clear after you have been watching for long enough. I had been watching. I was going to keep watching. The question was still open. That was enough to begin with.